1 month ago, I gave you my thoughts on Spiked Magazine's debate titled "Is the Left Eating Itself?" and in this video I'm going to return to the scene to address one of the secondary, but very much salient contentions within it. That being the feud between Angus Johnston and Brendan O'Neill regarding free speech for Nazis. This is Censored Speech Debunked.
I'm an ACLU guy, I'm a First Amendment absolutist guy, and as I was growing up, right, thinking about the concept of free speech, the place you would always go was Skokie, right? That was the example that you would always give, that if you really were for free speech, you had to be for the free speech of the Nazis in Skokie. And the way that that was formulated was that to be for free speech means to be, most of all, for the free speech of the people that you hate the most. And the people that you hate the most are the Nazis, so that's where you go. I think that's wrong.
So there's the claim. Angus believes that being for free speech does not mean being for the free speech of those you hate the most.
If you really were for free speech, you had to be for the free speech of the Nazis in Skokie. I think that's wrong.
And here's the first reason he gives for his position.
I think that to be for free speech means that you have to be for the free speech the most of the people whose free speech is most under attack, right? If the people that you hate the most are relatively privileged in terms of having the ability to avail themselves of their First Amendment rights, then they're not the people that you need to be supporting the most. The people you need to be supporting most are the people who are most under attack.
Now, Angus goes on to give several other reasons, including one in which he defends Antifa. But here lies the first point I want to make. Angus is conflating two questions, one being, is all speech protected by free speech, and the other being, whose speech should be prioritised defending, and he's acting as if we must choose to either protect the speech of those we hate, or the speech of those most under attack, when this simply isn't the case. If we say all speech is protected, which is not the same as saying that all speech carries no consequence, or that all speech can be exerted anywhere and at any time, then we get to defend our own speech, our adversaries, and those who are most under attack. And let's face it, the latter two are often the same. Or in other words, if we say free speech means free speech for all people and all ideas, then priority simply isn't a concern. Now, as a slight side note, I want to emphasise that the reason I'm using Angus's defence of this position, which is held by a hell of a lot more people than you might think, is because it's a sophisticated rendition, a stillman, if you will. But before we move on, I think it's necessary to give an example of what this position looks like in practice, because it ain't pretty.
I believe in open discussion.
You believe in a platform for hate, oppression, a platform for hate.
May I respond?
No, I'm not interested.
I believe in open
I don't
discussion.
care what you believe. I believe no.
We don't want you here.
We don't want you.
You're not welcome here.
I will
You
say
like
that.
people like you are not welcome here.
Welcome.
Go away. Go away.
Excuse me.
Go
Excuse me.
away. Go away.
Excuse me.
Go away.
Go away.
Go away.
Go away.
Nazi scum off our street! Nazi scum off our street! Nazi scum off our street! Nazi scum off our street!
So here we have someone very politely defending free speech by holding a sign that reads, "The right to openly discuss ideas must be defended." And yet, because the protesters are against the speech of those they hate, he's been silenced, physically manoeuvred, and called a Nazi. Again, for saying that everyone has the right to express their thoughts. Now, needless to say, I don't like Nazis, but for me the problem here is outrageously obvious. Anyhow, to get back on track, here's the second reason that Angus gave.
When we're talking about free speech and protecting free speech, we need to be very, very clear on what we mean. Because Milo Yiannopoulos does not have a right to speak at the UC Berkeley campus, and I say that as a First Amendment absolutist. Richard Spencer does not have a First Amendment right to speak on any campus, and again, I say that as a First Amendment absolutist. The American campus is a place where It's a community, and it's an institution. It is not a place where anybody has an equal right to speak.
So, first off,
so does Richard Spencer have a right to speak on college campuses? Turns out legally he does. Let's say that your college has a policy whereby, a public college has a policy whereby you can rent space. Then Richard Spencer has as much right to rent that space at a public college as anybody else does, and you can't bar him.
And secondly, and more importantly, despite Angus saying that when we talk about free speech, we have to be
very, very clear on what we mean.
He ironically didn't refer to free speech, he referred to the First Amendment, and they're actually not the same thing.
At the New York Law School, a couple of weeks ago, I was debating Angus Johnston, and he describes himself as a First Amendment absolutist. However, he supports the new forms of censorship on campus, like trigger warnings or shutting down meetings that are too extreme and so on. And as he said this, I thought, you know what, there actually isn't necessarily a contradiction between those two things, because you can support the restriction on any government intervention in censorship while also giving a green light towards the more informal censorship.
And so hence, this isn't a First Amendment issue, it's a free speech issue. Anyhow, to prevent myself from getting too far ahead of myself, here's how Brendan responded to Angus during the debate.
Yeah, I want to defend free speech for Nazis, because the idea that you can have free speech but not for Nazis is such a profound contradiction in terms. That's not free speech, that's licensed speech. That's speech that you are licensed, that is speech you are licensed to enjoy so long as you are not a Nazi. That's not freedom of speech, that's the end. That is the end of freedom of speech.
Now, I appreciate that it's hard to hear someone defend the free speech of reprehensible people and ideas, and that on the surface it seems like a moral and logical imperative to silence them, but there's several seriously sincere reasons why we shouldn't, and over the years Brendan has conveyed them with eloquent vigour. For example, in 2015 at Oxford Union, he gave one of the best defences of free speech I've ever seen, which I've linked in the description and cannot recommend enough. But in a nutshell, he explained that 700 years ago, John Wycliffe was denounced and no platform for saying that everyone should be able to read the Bible because his speech was deemed an offence against the ecclesiastical order. That 200 years ago, Percy Shelley was ridiculed and no platform for saying, "I don't believe in God," because he caused maximum offence, and that 100 years ago, the Chameleon magazine was terminated after just one issue for saying a man should be allowed to have sex with another man, because it was an insult on the animal creation. And Brendan concluded by saying,
Giving offence is good. In fact, it's essential. Humans have long had the urge to offend against the natural order, the religious order, the moral order, and in the process, they have pushed humanity forward. In fact, pretty much every leap forward in history, pretty much every freedom we enjoy, is a product of individuals having given offence.
Now, in reply to this, one might say, sure, let's have the freedom to offend, but not the freedom to incite violence. The neo-Nazis aren't just offending people, they're being hateful. But the problem here is that what's conceived as violent speech, or as it's more frequently called, hate speech, is subjective. What one person sees as hate speech, another doesn't. I, for example, see the act of advocating Islamic Sharia law as an incitement of violence, because, to say the least, its establishment would result in homosexuals being thrown in prison or killed. To me, Sharia law isn't just offensive, it's violent, and yet notice that I'm not trying to ban Sharia preachers. In fact, I want them to preach their hateful ideology in public, so that people like me can address, ridicule, and destroy it. Now again, one might reply by saying that they wouldn't personally call the advocating of Sharia law an incitement of violence, but that's actually the point. What is conceived as offence and violence is subjective. Now, trust me when I say that I don't like quoting a Fox News anchor, but within the following clip, Tucker Carlson simply nails it.
And I agree with everything you said. That is hateful and it's awful. I'm offended by it.
It is.
But really what you're saying is you're offended. And that's the problem with hate speech, this fake category that we've made up all of a sudden, because it's entirely subjective. What's offensive to you or hateful to you may not be as offensive to me. We're both American citizens. We both live under the same Bill of Rights.
I agree.
You see the problem. So attempts by the left to ban speech are as bad as attempts by the right to ban speech. So why don't we just call a truce and stop trying to prevent people we disagree with from speaking?
So there's the first reason we should give free speech to those we hate. Offence and hate speech are subjective. It's a very slippery slope. The second reason is that it simply doesn't work.
Stamping out the speech of those who have abhorrent things to say isn't going to work. The reason that those messages are resonant now has to do with the place we are in history. The reason that these people are making progress is that people are now listening for those messages, and anybody who deploys them is going to get a hearing. So the way to approach this is to look at the deeper questions that have put us at a moment of austerity that causes those messages to be resonant rather than the narrow free speech rights.
And the third reason to give free speech to those we hate is because not doing so has devastating consequences.
If you want to see the danger of censorship, just look at people like Richard Spencer and Milo Yiannopoulos. Their fame, their power to the extent that they have it, their influence, the fact that you all know who they are, even though they don't have any good ideas, is entirely down to censorship.
I honestly think that Brendan's so on the money here. Many of the right's current most prominent figures owe their status, and in some cases entirely, due to censorship. Not due to good ideas or intelligible discourse, but due to them being no platform because they were deemed offensive and/or hateful. History has taught us again and again and again that censorship often has a very heavy price. It empowers the censored, and it deprives ordinary people, like myself, from defeating bad ideas in the only way we truly can. In public, with reason, rationality, logic, evidence, and consistency. If you think someone has a bad, offensive, or even violent idea, let them express it, because without it being public, it has no opposition. The way we rid the world of bad ideas is not by silencing them, it's by discussing them. Anyhow, I'm going to leave you with another epic speech from Brendan, but before I do, I'm pleased to announce that this month's patron of the month is Daniel Martinez, and you've won a copy of Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene. Congratulations, and thank you so much for your support. And as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and those of you who have donated via PayPal.
Freedom of speech is the foundational freedom. It's the freedom that makes everything else possible. It's the freedom, the right to vote, the right to association, the right to political organization. None of those make any sense or are even workable without freedom of speech, without the right to say what you want, to publish what you want, to distribute what you want. So the fact that there is a new left, or students, or society in general, that is increasingly uncomfortable with freedom of speech should concern us enormously.